Okay, chapter 3, the social self. I really like this chapter because this is when the information of the textbook of social psychology starts to get into practical application of how um, social psychology infiltrates our lives and how we see it play out, these theories, these ideas. You can see real life proof of these ideas coming into play, whether it's because of something you've been through or you've witnessed someone else go through. So I really like this chapter. I feel like it's something that we can all identify with at least an aspect of it. So let's get into chapter 3, the social self. So the nature of the social self. So how accurate are we in our own self-knowledge? So who a person is in one social context is often not the same as a person in another social environment. So someone who is one way in class may not be the same way around their friends, may not be the same way around their parents. So people definitely change from scenario to scenario. So given that, our self-understanding is largely a product of our construal processes, which is our interpretation of the world around us. So us making sense of our experiences, preferences, attributes. So given that, who is the most knowledgeable about yourself? Is it yourself? Is it someone close to you? Who truly knows you and your intentions and can predict your behaviors and predict how you're going to feel about something? Who is that? Do you think it's you? Do you think it's someone that's close to you that sees you a lot, um that understands you? Well, I would say that we are better judges of our internal traits. No one can truly know what we're thinking on the inside. Um, but other people have better information for judging our external traits because they're the ones that are observing our behavior, that observe our behavior on a day-to-day basis. Maybe it's a best friend, maybe it's a boyfriend, girlfriend, maybe it's a sibling. Maybe they can predict our behavior better than we can, but we can predict the way that we feel better. Because while our behaviors may change from social context to social context, um, our internal traits may not. We may be thinking the same things, but we show it in a different way depending on who we are around. And we'll get into that actually throughout the whole semester. Who you're around changes the way you behave for sure. Okay, so how do we organize this knowledge we have about ourselves? So some psychologists assume the self-knowledge is stored in memory in cognitive structures called self-schemas. Self-schemas also help us navigate and make sense of all the information that bombards us every day. Past actions and experiences supporting the self-schema are abundant in memory and come readily to mind. For example, extroversion versus introversion. So that's something that you know about yourself no matter what. So a self-schema is a cognitive structure derived from past experience that represents a person's beliefs and feelings about the self, both in general and in specific situations. So for the example of extroversion versus introversion, so from past experiences, if you found yourself liking to be in social situations and talking a lot with people and kind of being um, not being afraid of being the center of attention or the life of the party or talking, you thrive off of social interaction because of those past experiences and memories that you have about yourself. That represents your belief that you are an extroverted person. That is knowledge you have about yourself. But if the opposite was true, if you find yourself at a party and you don't really want to talk to anyone, you'd rather stay home or maybe with like one or two friends, then maybe something you come to know about yourself from past experiences is that you're introverted. And that is something you know about yourself. And that structure, that cognitive structure is created based off of past experiences. So how do we form this sense of self that we have? The people that we surround ourselves with help form that sense of self we have. So we learn what attitudes and behaviors are socially appropriate from parents, siblings, teachers, peers, or other socialization agents, such as maybe a class that teaches you how to be a certain way, whether it's a TV show, whether it's a book, whatever it is. We learn, we are a sponge of our environment around us. So socialization agents influence personality traits, abilities, and preferences we come to think as our own. So by watching other people, by reading books, by by watching TV shows, watching movies, we absorb kind of the personalities and the traits and the abilities of other people. We try out new things, we adapt new things. And that's why it's so important to be mindful of the people we surround ourselves with, the people we spend the most time with the shows we watch, the books we read, because we kind of become a combination of all of those things. And we also kind of get a sense of ourselves by the way we look at how other people look at us. And that's what a reflected self-appraisal is. So we believe about ourselves in what we think other people believe about us. So a belief about what others think about oneself, we see ourselves partly through the eyes of those around us. So it's not necessarily what they think of us, but it's what we think they think of us. So we internalize how we think others perceive us, not necessarily how they actually see us. So let's say, you started a conversation with a new person and you feel like they think you're weird or the conversation was awkward. And so you walk away and you're like, oh my gosh, I was really awkward. But that person may just have had a weird face or weird reaction, but in their head, they're like, that was a nice person. I want to be their friend. But how you perceive them perceiving you was, oh my gosh, I'm never going to talk to that person again. That was so awkward. I just biffed that real bad. They probably think I'm a weirdo, when that may or may not be the case. But that's what reflected self-appraisal is you're trying to gauge how someone else looks at you, and then you then appraise yourself in such a way, or value yourself, or think of yourself in the way that you think that person thought of you. Situationism and the social self. So our social self shifts from one situation to another. Like I said earlier, depending on what social context you're in, your behaviors may change. And that's called a working self concept. This is a subset of self-knowledge that is brought to mind in a particular context, usually the subset that's most relevant or appropriate in the current situation. We tend to highlight what makes us unique or distinctive in a given situation. At least in the Western world, what's most central to identity is what makes a person distinct. So, if you are hanging out with your friends, you might tell them like something that they think might be impressive about yourself to make yourself stand out, make your friends think you're cool, whatever it is. It's like, oh, I beat this level in this video game that none of your other friends have beat, or oh, I asked this boy or I asked this girl out and they're way out of your league, but they said yes. And so that sets you apart. Well, that may not impress, while that might impress your friends, that may not impress your teachers, or that may not impress your parents. So it's whatever subset of knowledge you have about the people around you, that the things you decide to speak about yourself, changes depending on who you're around. So despite our social self changing, most of us experience a sense of continuity in the self, the feeling that we have a stable and core self. So how can we reconcile what appears to be dueling notions of malleability and stability in the self? So meaning, how can you change so much depending on the social context you're in, depending who you're around? How can you justify that? How can you really be the same person? How is there any stability in the self with so much that can change? And yes, there are core aspects of yourself that will not change regardless of the situation. If you are an honest person through and through, and on the inside you are an honest person, that is a core aspect of yourself, you're not going to give up your honesty regardless of who you are around. You may change behaviors depending on the people you are around, depending on the social context, but there are some aspects to you that will not change. And that is what gives stability in the self. Those are the things that will not change, regardless of the situation you're in. So, although a person's sense of self may shift depending on the context, it's likely that these shifts conform to a predictable, stable pattern. So, you know that you're going to be acting one way around your friends. That's not really going to change much. You act one way around your parents. That's not really going to change much. In school, that's not really going to change much. At your job, that's not really going to change much. So, it's predictable, it's stable, and then you have these stable parts of yourself, core aspects of yourself that won't change. So it's not much of an inner conflict with how can I justify acting one way or another around other people. You're just basically reading the situation, but you're not becoming a totally different person, if that makes sense. So how does culture affect the social self? This is the first time, I believe, that we're going to talk about independent and interdependent cultures. Um, but it really goes throughout the rest of the course. Every chapter, it kind of breaks down a different aspect of social psychology and how this can affect people, whether they're a part of an interdependent culture or an independent culture. So an independent culture is like the type of culture that the United States is generally a part of. Western culture, they promote an independent self-construal, an independent view of the world. The self is an autonomous entity that is distinct and separate from others. It's important for people to assert their uniqueness and independence and focus on internal causes of behavior, that you succeed and fail because of yourself. You succeed is because of you. You fail, it's because of you. The decisions you make is for the betterment of yourself. So we see here that you've got your mother, your father, your siblings, friends, coworkers. While there may be some connections, there's no overlap. That you are your own identity, you are your own entity, you are your own person, and that is what Western cultures, independent cultures, tend to lean towards. However, in other cultures, such as a lot of Asian and Latino cultures and African cultures, the culture fosters interdependent self-construal. So whenever you view the world, it's not independent, it's you're viewing it through your lens and through the lenses of your community. So the self is fundamentally connected to others. The imperatives are to find a place within the community and fulfill appropriate roles. So you don't just succeed and fail on your own, you succeed and fail with others. A success is a success for you and your community, and a failure is a failure for you and your community. So you see there's some overlap here, that the things you do don't just affect you, they affect those around you because of how interconnected it is and how dependent everyone is upon the other. And so we're really going to highlight these differences throughout the semester, and how being a part of an interdependent and independent culture can really affect your social behavior, can affect your social perception, can affect your choices, can affect pretty much every aspect of your life. Okay, so who are you? Americans' self-descriptions tend to be context-free responses referring to personality traits. So how do people in our types of culture, how do you define yourself? So you might say, I'm a friendly person, I'm hardworking, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, this is my job, blah, 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 blah. So you're not really giving much context to it. It's like, okay, you're a nice person to who? You are a friendly person to, you are hardworking where? You are a sister to who? You are a wife to who? But people from interdependent cultures typically refer themselves in context to the relationships they are in. So I am Jan's friend. I am Colin's wife. I am serious at work. And you might even say, I'm serious at work at Northwestern Oklahoma State University. So they're qualified by context and by relationship. It's a little bit more specific because of how intertwined it matters who they are friends with. It matters who they are married to. It matters where they work, because of how much they all play off of one another. How does gender affect the social self? Women in the United States tend to construe the self in more interdependent terms than men do. In contrast, men in the United States tend to prioritize difference and uniqueness, construing the self in more independent terms. That's interesting. Why is that? Women are more likely than men to describe themselves through social characteristics and relationships. So saying like, I'm a kind person, I am such and such as friend, I am such and such as wife, I'm such and such as partner, whatever that is. In social interactions, women tend to be more empathetic and better judges of other people's personalities and emotions. And it's because if they have a more interdependent view of the world, interdependent construal of the world, then they are going to worry more about those around them. So they're going to be more empathetic and better judges of other people's personalities and emotions. However, men tend to be more attuned to their own internal responses, independent, such as increased heart rate, whereas women are more attuned to social cues, such as other people's reactions. So where do these differences come from? Where do maybe some of the gender role journals you did maybe give you some insight as to where do these differences come from? Do they come from societal cues? Do they come from, the way you were raised? Does it come from religion? Does it come from what kind of pressures, what kind of constructs growing up do these differences come from? And this changes. This is just, we're talking specifically in the United States. But think about like maybe around the world, how do these change? Very interesting. Okay, social comparison. Social comparison is something that I'm sure every single one of you has engaged in at some point in time. So, according to the social comparison theory, there is an idea that people compare themselves to others to obtain an accurate assessment of their own opinions, abilities, and internal states. So, what you're going to do is, if you want to gauge about how good you are at something, you're going to compare yourself to someone else and say, okay, you're either going to think, okay, I'm doing about how I thought, or I'm not doing as well as I thought. I would like to be better, or I'm actually doing better than I thought. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. So to get an accurate sense of how good you are at something, you need to compare yourself with people who have roughly your skill level. So let's say you're a swimmer, because I used to be a swimmer, and it's an easy example. So let's say you're a swimmer and you want to kind of gauge how good you are, get an accurate assessment of how good you are. Race against someone, and someone that's within a few seconds of your time. So let's say it's a 50 yard or 50 meter freestyle. Let's say your time is normally 28 seconds. Maybe race against someone that's anywhere between 27 and 30 seconds to get an accurate idea of where you are. But sometimes we like to feel good about ourselves. Sometimes we like to feel that we are better than people. Sometimes we would like to feel good about our talents, our abilities, our opinions. So maybe instead of racing against someone that's roughly your speed, maybe race against someone whose time is like 35 seconds. And when you crush them by a full, 8 or 9 seconds, you're gonna feel pretty good about yourself, and you're gonna be like, yeah, I'm good. I'm pretty good. But when the focus is on improving yourself, when you want to strive to be better, You need to push aside the ego a little bit, push aside the self-esteem benefits of downward comparison, which is racing against a person that's way slower than you, that it's someone that's not as good as you, and engage in upward social comparison. So you're going to look up to those who are better than you. So maybe race against someone whose time is like 23, 24 seconds, and it might be a little humbling, but you might say, okay, there's room for improvement. I see their technique. I see the way they do things. I see the way they train. I see the way they eat. I see the way they sleep. And I want to be better. So I'm going to be like them. So we have just regular social comparison, which is where we compare ourselves to someone who is roughly at our level. Downward social comparison, which is where we look down on someone who's not as good as we are. We like to feel good about ourselves, and we compare ourselves to someone who is not as good as we are. And then upward social comparison is where we compare ourselves to someone who is better than we are in order to improve. So that could be someone, it could be someone on your team who's just, a bit better than you, or it could be like someone who's a professional who's way better than you are. You look up to Michael Jordan or Serena Williams or whoever, Michael Phelps. You look up to those people who are amazing at their sport or whatever aspect of life. It doesn't just have to be sports, but that's an easy example. But those are the different types of social comparison. So given that, what impact do you think social media has had on social comparison? It's just something for you to think about, something that as we get into these, thinking about how technology and social media has really impacted these aspects of our lives. It's something to really think about and gauge what's important and gauge whether social media is evil, a necessary evil, a good in our lives. That's for you to decide. But one thing I want you to think about is, what impact do you think social media has on social comparison? Okay, now on to self-esteem. So self-esteem is the overall positive or negative evaluation people have of themselves. Do I feel good about myself? Do I feel negatively about myself? Are there some aspects of my life I feel good about myself, and other aspects I feel poorly about myself? That's probably pretty accurate. So we have a few different types of self-esteem to talk about. So first is your trait self-esteem. This is a person's enduring level of self-regard across time. It's pretty stable. It can, trend upwards or downwards, but it's not going to be like a big up and down roller coaster. Overall, kind of what your identity is. I am a child of God. I am a great wife. I'm a great friend. I'm a hard worker. Those are things that I pretty much always believe about myself. Okay. But then we have your state self-esteem. This is the dynamic, changeable self-evaluations a person experiences as momentary feelings about the self. So, maybe you really tanked an exam, or maybe you just had a really weird conversation, or maybe you let someone down, or maybe you messed up in some way. And so that can kind of tank your state self-esteem. You feel bad in the moment. Or, you aced an exam that you didn't really study for, or you came first place in your track meet, or you did something really great that really soared your self-esteem in the moment. So it's a dynamic, changeable self-evaluation. It could be like a roller coaster, up and down, or it could be pretty steady, just depending on the person. And then we have our contingencies of self-worth. So this is a perspective maintaining that people's self-esteem is contingent on the successes and failures in domains on which they have based their self-worth. So this is kind of different from the trait and state self-esteem. This is where does your self-worth come from, and is it stable? So let's say you're someone that identifies as a good student, that is something you have put kind of your identity into, that you are a straight A student. Okay. That was me. That was me through middle school, high school, and getting into college. I'd already taken, a couple of college classes, got A's in those. Um, and I really, I was a straight A student. That's kind of how I identified myself as. I was a good student. And then my undergraduate degree is in biology. And then first semester of actual college, freshman year, I take general zoology with Dr. Place. He's no longer at Northwestern. I take general zoology with Dr. Place. And, between I was in choir and I was working at Sonic and, doing all these things. And I just did not know how to study. I did not prepare well enough. And I failed a test, which, no big deal. I mean, everyone fails every now and then. But I ended up getting a B in the class. That really took a dig at my self-worth for a little bit, because that was something um, that on which I had based a little bit of my self-worth was my 4.0 GPA. Whatever it is that you are tied into, something that you have based some of your self-worth, some of your identity on. Like, I am a good friend. Okay. That is something that I'm a great listener. I think I give good advice. But let's say I really let my friend down. Let's say like I hurt their feelings. I really let them down in a major way. That would really take a kick to my self-esteem, to my self-worth, because it's something I pride myself in. It's something that I identify myself as. And so that's what that's saying is if there's something that you identify as or base your self-worth in, and you do poorly or do really well, that can greatly affect your self-worth. So that's self-esteem. So based off of self-esteem, we have the sociometer hypothesis. So this is the idea that self-esteem is an internal subjective index or marker of the extent to which a person is included or looked on favorably by others. So the things that make us feel good about ourselves, feeling likable, competent, physically attractive, and morally upright, are precisely those things that make others accept us. So we kind of have this internal meter. It's like, okay, how are people looking at me? Kind of like we talked about the reflected self-appraisal a few slides back. So we have this kind of internal meter, and if it's kind of going in the negative, what do we need to change? How do we need to make ourselves more likable? How do we make ourselves come across in a better way? That's what the sociometer hypothesis is saying, is that based off of this internal meter, we can turn things on or turn things off in a social context to make ourselves feel and look more favorably by others. Does culture affect self-esteem? Many East Asian languages do not have a word for self-esteem. Westerners invented the term self-esteem, which reflects a long-standing concern in the West with the value of the individual. Interesting. So if you're part of an interdependent culture, like a lot of East Asian countries are, if you are so concerned with the community and with those around you, you're not really as concerned about yourself. So are you really thinking about how you think of yourself? Not really. So there's not a word for self-esteem. People of other cultures are not concerned about themselves, but they are more concerned with the other ways of feeling good about themselves, such as self-improvement and commitment to collective goals. Because if you improve yourself, you are improving your collective group. Cultural differences in the emphasis on promoting self-esteem versus improving the self can have important consequences for how people respond to failures and setbacks. So if you're focused on self-improvement and you have a setback, it's like, okay, setbacks are a part of the improvement process. So it's not really that big of a deal. And you have those surrounding you kind of to boost you back up. But if you're worried about self-esteem, well, your self-esteem can, dip and raise and dip and raise. And it can really create kind of this roller coaster of emotions and how you think of yourself. Because if you fail, it's like, that's on me. And that's on something that I pride myself in. And so I'm going to think poorly about myself. So it can definitely have an impact on how people respond to failures and setbacks. So, what are people's motives of evaluating themselves? People are motivated to view themselves positively. We all want to think positive things about ourselves. We don't want to think that we are terrible people and that we suck and that we are not nice people and that we don't do well in our jobs and that we aren't good friends, we aren't good family members, what have you. We are motivated to view ourselves positively. So, through self enhancement, this shows the desire to maintain, increase, or protect our self view, our positive self views. So, what are some things you have done um, to use self enhancement? And how could this tie into social comparison theory? So, what are some things you've done to make yourself feel better about yourself? Do you tell yourself positive things? Um, do you go and treat yourself a little bit, make yourself feel better? Um, do you maybe lie to yourself a little bit or justify to yourself a little bit, like why you did the things you did to make you feel better make you feel better about yourself? Um, so how could this tie into social comparison theory? This could tie into social comparison theory because maybe you compare yourselves to others and it's like, well, downward social comparison. Well, at least I'm not like that person. At least I'm not, you know, a cheating skis or whatever. At least I'm not a bad person. Or you could use upward social comparison and be like, oof, maybe I'm not the best person, but with self-enhancement, I would really recommend that. Or it's like, okay, well, the people that are kind of on my same level, they seem to be doing okay. I should be fine. But using downward social comparison for self-enhancement can definitely help you feel better about yourself. I'm not recommending you do it because that's making you feel better than someone else. But yeah, that's self-enhancement. Um, so another type of self-enhancement is the better than average effect. The finding that most people think they are above average on various personality traits and ability dimensions. So why are we so beat about ourselves? Why do we think that we are better than we are? Why do we think we are better than other people at, maybe our hobbies or at school or at relationships? Why do we think we're better than other people? And it's because we define and interpret our qualities based off of our best versus other people's worst. And we also define qualities differently than how other people do. So, uh, for example, I think I'm a good driver, and my husband thinks he's a good driver. Um, I might say I'm a better driver than he is, and he might say he's a better driver than I am, and it's because and we might both be right and we might both be wrong. Um, but we have different ways of defining what a good driver is. So I might say I'm a good driver because I'm a more cautious driver. So my quality of driving, how I interpret uh, quality of driving is on how cautious someone is. But then my husband, he might define the quality of driving as how skillful a driver is. He is a more skilled driver than I am. So we interpret qualities in a different way, and so we highlight the things that we are good at and maybe low light the things that other people are good at. Okay, for real, my husband is a better driver than I am, but just for the sake of the example, I am a more cautious driver and he is a more skillful driver. People are more likely to think that they are significantly above average in ambiguous traits that are easy to construe in multiple ways, such as I'm more autistic, I'm more sympathetic. That doesn't really have anything tangible, but it's hard to kind of misconstrue your abilities in something that is unambiguous, like being punctual. If you're good at being punctual, that means you're someone that's constantly on time or early. You can't fake that. If you are someone that is perpetually late, if you're perpetually not on time, you can't misconstrue being punctual. But you can misconstrue, it's hard to define who is someone that is more artistic than you. that's how do you define what artistic is? How do you define how, the way people show sympathy? So people are more likely to think they are significantly above average in these ambiguous traits that are easily misconstrued. And people tend to judge other people by the way they are on average and define themselves in terms of how they behave when they're at their best. So this gives me an example of American Idol. Grew up watching American Idol. That might show my age a little bit. I don't know if any of you guys did, but I remember seeing some of these live shows and I'd be like, I could do better than that. And my dad would be like, yeah, you could do better than that. But also, I'm not taking into account that they are in front of a live audience on live TV with all these, all these things going on around them. They've got all these nerves built up. Sure, on my best day, by myself in my room, in my karaoke machine, whatever, yeah, I could probably perform better than they could. But that's on my best when I've got, no allergies, when my throat is clear, when I've, gotten a good night's sleep, when I haven't been yelling at basketball games. Yeah, maybe at my best, I could do better than what they did on their average to sucky night. So I'm judging other people based off of, these contestants on American Idol who made it to the live shows. I'm judging them on their average or not so good night versus my best night, if that makes sense. So we have this better than average effect that we take our best, we misconstrue qualities that, okay, these are the qualities I'm good at, so this is how I'm going to define what a good driver or what a good singer or what a good friend is. And I'm going to take what my best is and what someone's, average to not so good is and say, yeah, I'm better than you because I could do better than that. Yes, I could do better than that, but I also could do worse than that. And so that's what the better than average effect is. And that's how another way that we do engage in self-enhancement. Another way we engage in self-enhancement is using self-affirmation. So according to the self-affirmation theory, people can maintain an overall sense of self-worth following psychologically threatening information by affirming a valued aspect of themselves unrelated to the threat. So they help minimize a wide range of defensive and potentially harmful behaviors so people can exhibit when faced with a threat. So go back to when I got a B in general zoology. Well, yeah, that is potentially psychologically threatening information that, it's like, oh gosh, like maybe I'm just not a good student. And I know to some people, a lot of people, a B is a good grade. And I think a B is a good grade now, but 19-year-old Rachel did not really think so. So what are some things I could say to myself that will make me feel better? So it's okay. I still have a pretty decent GPA, but these are things that need to be unrelated to the threat. So don't worry about grades. Don't worry about school. What are some other things I'm good at? It's like, it's okay. You are a good sister. You are a good daughter. You are a good friend. You are kind. You are, you are kind. You are smart. You are important. Those are things you can say to yourself to help fend off harmful behaviors or harmful thoughts that could come about from a psychologically threatening event or information, such as, I did poorly in this class. I'm feeling like I'm kind of a failure, I'm kind of stupid. Or what are some things that I can say or do to myself to make me feel better about myself? And so that's what self-affirmation is. How does self-enhancement tie into well-being? So in a study, participants who are more likely to hold positive illusions about themselves, which were high self-enhancers, and participants who are less likely to hold positive illusions about themselves, which are low self-enhancers, faced several stress-inducing tasks during which their biological responses to stress were recorded. The results showed a healthier set of coping responses among the high self-enhancers compared with low self-enhancers. Yeah, you're not going to get as stressed. Your body is not going to release all the stress hormones such as cortisol, norepinephrine, um, if you are more able to cope with threats to yourself. So like I did poorly on a test, or I really messed up, or something like that. If you have the ability to self-enhance yourself, then you're not going to feel as stressed as if someone who cannot. But people who rate themselves more favorably than others are seen by others as narcissistic. So there has to be a balance. You can't just always think that you're the best, and even if you fail, you're still the best. That's someone who is narcissistic. People who hold relatively accurate views of themselves are judged by others more positively than people who rate themselves more favorably. So we do need to be seated a little bit in reality, but we don't need to be so hard on ourselves, but we don't need to be not hard on ourselves at all. And this mainly pertains to people within Western cultures, because a positive self-view is a cherished cultural view in the West. Okay, now on to self-verification. This is kind of like we check with other people to make sure that the view we have of ourselves is accurate. So this is a theory that sometimes people strive for stable, subjectively accurate beliefs about themselves because such self-views give themselves a sense of coherence and predictability. So if something I think about myself is not what others think about themselves, is not what they think about me, then it's going to be, some social interactions could be a little shaky. So stable and self-accurate views make us more predictable to ourselves and others, which helps interactions go with others go more smoothly. So if I'm in a conversation and I think I'm being funny, but other people don't think I'm being funny, and I just keep cracking these jokes, well, that's not going to be a very smooth interaction. They're either going to walk away, or they're going to, or they're going to give me these looks like, seriously, just shut up. But if I can verify with others, by using self-verification, if I can be like, am I really a funny person? And that person says, no, not really. Well, then that can bounce back to me and be like, okay, well, then I need to check myself and realize that these jokes that I'm trying to land are not landing. But let's say I think I'm a funny person, and I check with people, it's like, I'm funny, right? They might say, yeah, you're funny. Well, then I know that I can have smooth interactions while trying to crack jokes because, hey, I got it verified through others that, yeah, I'm funny. And so now I have this stable, self-accurate view of myself, which makes my social interactions in the future more predictable because I know what others think of me. Okay. And it's the same way I think of myself. We strive to get others to confirm or verify our pre-existing beliefs about ourselves. People with negative self-views spend more time studying negative rather than positive feedback about themselves, and vice versa. It's kind of a vicious cycle. It either spins in the negative if you're already leaning towards negative, and spins towards the positive if you're already in a positive viewpoint. People choose to enter into relationships that maintain consistent views of the self. This guarantees that their personal lives will probably confirm their self-views. You're probably not going to date someone that thinks that your jokes aren't funny, because if you think you're funny, but your partner doesn't think you're funny, well, that's not really the best. Or you think you're a good person, but your partner doesn't think you're a good person, that's not going to work out. Self-enhancement seems to be more relevant to our emotional responses to feedback about ourselves. Self-verification determines our more cognitive assessment of how valid that feedback is. Okay, so how do we regulate our behavior in social situations? We have all these thoughts about ourselves, other people have these thoughts about ourselves. How do we regulate our behavior amongst all of that? So self-regulation is the process by which people initiate alter, and control their behavior in pursuit of goals, including the ability to resist short-term rewards that thwart the attainment of long-term goals. Okay, so say you're climbing up a ladder, and you're, climbing up the corporate ladder, climbing up a ladder, and you go up 3 rungs, and someone says, "Oh, I've got this job for you. Climb down the ladder, uh, and you'll get it." So you've walked up you've climbed up 3 rungs. You jump off the ladder. You get the next opportunity. Okay. Um, so you're like, okay, that didn't really work out. Okay, so let's climb up the ladder. You get up 5 rungs. Someone says, "Come down. I've got something for you." You jump off the ladder. Okay, so you keep jumping off the ladder, but if you would have just kept going, eventually you would have reached the top of the ladder and attained this long-term goal, rather than stopping and starting over, stopping and starting over, stopping and starting over. And so when you stop and start over, you have to start over from scratch. So if you would have just clung on to the goals that you had, then you could have already have reached your long-term goal, whether it's a job, it's um whether it's amount of money, whether it's a family, whether it's just where you want to be in life. Stop taking these short-term rewards um that will thwart your ability to reach your long-term goal. So what are some ways you've had to self-regulate? You don't always give yourself what you want in order to get what you truly want, what you want in the moment. What I want in the moment, thinking back to college, what I want in the moment is to hang out with my friends or maybe take a nap or something like that. But it's like, no, I need to study for this test, because if I don't, I'm going to fail. And if I fail this test, I might, do poorly in the class, and then I might lose my college scholarships. Then I can't afford college, and then I'm going to have to drop out, and then I'm not going to attain this long-term goal of attaining a college degree. So don't take the short-term rewards that will thwart your long-term goals. Okay, now on to self-discrepancy theory. There are 3 different selves that we have within ourselves, can kind of be at war with each other. So, according to the self-discrepancy theory, it's a theory that behavior is motivated by standards reflecting ideal and ought selves. So, we have our actual self. This is the self you believe that you are. Then we have your ideal self and your ought self. So the ideal self is a self that embodies people's wishes and aspirations. So this is who you ideally would be. I ideally would be this kind of person. I ideally would have this kind of career. I ideally would have this kind of family. But then you have your ought self, and this is what people think you ought to be. This is the self that is concerned with the duties, obligations, and external demands people feel they are compelled to honor. So maybe your mom says, "Oh no, don't follow that career path. Follow this career path," or "Don't do this, do that." So I had my actual self, and then I had my ideal self, and then I had my ought self. So my ought self was, so my actual self was someone that was just trying to figure out what they wanted to do with their lives after college. Um, my ought self was, that I would be married, have babies right away, and stay at home, and never pursue any kind of career or anything like that. That was from pressure from my mom. So those were the duties, obligations, and external demands I felt compelled to honor, because of the pressure my mom put on me. But then my ideal self was someone that pursued a little bit more, that maybe put off having kids for a little bit, and figured out what I wanted to be, whether it was a teacher, whether it was maybe a doctor, what I wanted to figure out what that was. And so my ideal self, like, I didn't I had these pictures in my head of what I could ideally be, um, which kind of gave me some pressure. And then I had, on the other hand, like what my mom wanted me to be, and that gave me some pressure. but they were kind of opposite of each other. They were kind of fighting with each other. So this theory suggests that our ideal and ought beliefs motivate us to modify our behavior to close the gap between our actual self and our ideal and ought selves. And I think I've kind of done that, not all the way, but maybe some of you guys feel that internal war as well. So if we have promotion focus, this is self-regulation of behaviors that focuses on positive outcomes. And deviation from this, your ideal self, who you ideally would be, can lead to depression. So if you aren't becoming the person that you ideally would be, well, then that can lead you to feeling, not so good about yourself, lead you to feeling depressed about yourself. And then prevention focus, if you have prevention focus, this is self-regulation of behaviors that focuses on avoiding negative outcomes. So deviation from this, your ought self, can lead to anxiety and panic. So when you aren't living up to the way that you think society or family or friends or whoever thinks that you should be, well, then that can lead you to really feeling anxious and like, I'm gonna have a panic attack right now. So keep that in mind, is that, be mindful of the information you take from others, and to not let it pressure you too much, because it can really have an impact on your mental health. Okay, so how do we have shifts in our construals and perspectives? So how we view the world. How does a shift in construals affect self-regulation? High-level construals involved abstract, global, essential features. So the forest, okay? Low-level construals emphasize salient, incidental, and concrete details. So the trees, so you see the forest for the trees. So larger goals that receive more appreciation when they are reached versus smaller short-term goals that do not require as much self-regulation. So yeah, okay, so I've got one tree, I plant one tree, and that's a short-term reward. Then I plant another tree, that's another short-term reward. I plant another, I plant another, I plant another, and eventually plant so many trees, you've got a forest. You've got this large, abstract, global goal that you have, but you had to keep planting these little concrete details, the trees. Okay. And so what are things that you can do that help you reach these short-term goals that build up to the long-term goals? But on the other hand, it's like, okay, so I've got the forest. This is this long-term goal, but if I chop down just one tree, then I can sell that tree for paper and get a little bit of a reward off on the side. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's just one tree. It's not gonna, I still have the forest. It's fine. Okay, a little bit later, let's chop down another tree. Let's chop down 5 more trees. Let's chop down 10 more trees. For these little short-term rewards, maybe a little bit of money, maybe a little bit of fame, maybe a little bit of whatever. But it's okay. I still have the forest. I still have the forest. It's fine. I still have the ability to attain this large overarching goal that I have. But then all of a sudden you look and you realize you don't have a forest anymore. You don't have the ability to reach this large goal that you once had, because you're taking the forest for the trees, the individual trees. You're getting these short-term goals that did not require any kind of self-regulation over this long-term goal that you once could have achieved, but now you can't anymore. So how do you shift your perception to see the forest instead of just the individual trees? So there are some automatic self-control strategies. The first is implementation intention. So you create an if-then plan to engage in a goal-oriented behavior. So then whenever a particular cue, if, is encountered. So you create these goal intentions. I can do this. If I do this, then I can do this. If I raise if I save $10,000, then I can buy that nice purse I want. Okay. If I go for a run, then I can spend my time doing something else. If I do this, then I can do this. And so you form multiple smaller implementation intentions related to the same goal, which increases the likelihood of goal attainment. So let's say your goal is to save $100,000 or $50,000 for a down payment of a house. But you got to form these multiple smaller goals. And so it's, first, if you look at raising $50,000, then it's going to seem like you can't even do it. But if you break it down into maybe goals of 5,000, that's 10%, 5,000 at a time, then it increases the likelihood of goal attainment. Maybe when you reach $5,000, then you get, you can do something fun for yourself. Maybe you'll treat yourself to a new shirt, or you raise $10,000. Maybe you can go on a weekend trip, something like that. So you give yourself small goals in order to attain the large goal. Okay, so kind of on to the next phase of this chapter, self-presentation. Our social self is often a dramatic performance in which we try to project a public self consistent with our hopes and aspirations. This public self is one that we actively create in our social interactions, and that is shaped by the perceptions of other people and the perceptions we want others to have of us. We say first impressions are important, so we try to put our best self forward, and then eventually, after getting to know someone, we kind of become more of our own selves. So self-presentation is presenting the person we would like others to believe we are. We have impression management. Okay, so we, if we're meeting someone important, maybe we might learn the things they like or don't like, and we might change, a little bit of what we talk about, a little bit about how we present ourselves, so we can manage the impression. Then we have our face, the public image of ourselves that we want others to believe. What are some occupations that encourage this? Maybe an actor or actress, maybe a lawyer, maybe, someone that has some kind of prestige that you need people to think a certain way about you in order to do well in that occupation. And then there's self-monitoring. This is the tendency to monitor one's behavior to fit the current situation. So you're not going to be, you're going to a 5-star dinner, you're not going to be loud and obnoxious and banging around. You're not going to be trying to crack jokes. That's not the situation for it. But when you're just with your friends, you can monitor your behavior to fit the current situation. So yeah, you can be, kind of rowdy and funny and cracking jokes and stuff, because that is a situation where that is okay. Self-handicapping. This is another way where we present ourselves in a different way. This is the tendency to engage in self-defeating behavior to protect the self in public and prevent others from making unwanted inferences based on poor performance. So let's say you've got a solo coming up in your school's concert, and you're nervous about it. You don't want to set anyone's expectations too high. So you're like, I've been having kind of this tickle in my throat lately, or, allergies have been kind of kicking my butt, or we just haven't had very much time to practice. So, it might be okay. And so if you do poorly, well, then it's fine, because no one was expecting great from you. But if you do great, well, then you've exceeded their expectations. So it's this tendency to be like, I don't know, it might be okay. You're handicapping yourself so that you can manage other people's ideas or their expectations of your performance in the future. Have any of you guys ever engaged in self-handicapping, whether it's for, any kind of athletics, or for a test, or for any kind of artistic performance or anything like that? I'm sure a lot of us have, to protect your own. I mean, you don't want people to be like, oh, that wasn't as good. That didn't really live up to the hype. And so you feel bad about yourself. But if it's like, if you manage their expectations and it was in line with their expectations, okay, you feel fine about that. And if you exceeded their expectations, then you feel really great about yourself. Okay, last slide. Presenting yourself online. So what does self-presentation look like in the online social world? Do you put your best self out there? Are you authentic? Do you are you conscientious about what you put on social media? Something to think about. How does self-presentation look like in the online social world? All right, that's all for chapter 3, and I'll see you next for chapter 4. All right, bye-bye.